Hi, everybody. We didn't realize, well, I had forgot that America's clocks change and the UK's clocks do not change. So we actually would have been on time. However, I am an hour further ahead of the USA than I ordinarily would be. So how about that? The magic of time zones. I don't actually understand. Like everyone likes, it's quite trendy, isn't it? Obviously, look at me. I'm a very trendy person. I know my trends.
I agree.
But thank you very much. But to moan about daylight savings time is really fashionable at the moment, or has been for a while, right?
Yeah, we first of all, none of us know which one is daylight savings time and which one is the other
That
one
there's another
because,
one.
well, we change the clocks twice each year.
Yes.
And when I say by nobody, I'm speaking for myself. I think this is technically this is daylight savings time, and then when we change it again in the fall, where we change the clocks back and we gain an hour, I forget what we call that, but I just call it daylight savings time as well.
Nighttime saving time.
Yeah. Um, Usually doesn't affect me because you lose an hour of sleep, but then you gain an hour of daylight in the evening, right? It usually doesn't affect my sleep patterns, but this year it did, and I'm
Are
still
you sure that's not a
adjusting.
placebo?
I mean, it could be. Like
Could be.
how would I measure that? You only get two two sample sizes or 2 points of data every year.
Do you think it was on your subconscious that this is a big deal this year?
I don't know. I don't know. You know what's on my subconscious? Seahawks football.
Wow, this is the shortest preamble ever. So, if you're listening to this, this is a podcast. The podcast gets edited and by our producer Ty, and you can download the podcast without the preamble on any good podcast app. Even the bad ones probably have us. So, 5-star review on the podcast app. Like the video, please, everybody. So that is very simple if you're watching live. You literally just go on the YouTube channel if you're not there, Matty F. Brown, click on the video, then click that big thumbs up. And that helps us. Complicated things. Okay. You want to get right into it immediately,
Yeah,
Griff?
yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the Seattle Overload podcast, where we have massive Seahawks free agency shenanigans to deal with. Griff, the Seahawks signed defensive tackle Dre'Mont Jones in a move that completely goes against all of the stuff that John Schneider usually does when it comes to free agency. Jones is the largest free agent signing since Seattle signed wide receiver Sidney Rice, remember him, in 2011. Seattle paid, well, they haven't paid, but they signed Jones to a 3-year, $51.5 million contract. This deal will pay Jones $23.5 million in year one and $35.02 million over the first 2 years of his contract. It's a massive, massive deal. It was a big shock because certain guys had signed elsewhere, certain guys had moved on, certain guys looked like they were being cut. We wondered if it would be more of the same from Seattle, but this looks like a completely different strategy. And yeah, Griff, what was your immediate reaction?
My immediate reaction was glee, joy, excitement. I remember watching him at OSU 4 years ago now, and really liking him as a player, thinking he was probably like a second round pick with upside. Sure enough, with Denver, he's seemingly gotten better every year. He's put on about 10, 15 pounds, like 285 right now. I think he played at like 270. I think he weighed in at 270 at the combine. That might be wrong though. That can be fact checked easily. Nevertheless, though, I remember watching him at OSU and thinking, he's a speed finesse interior rusher. If he just could gain 10, 15 pounds and not lose any speed, he could really, reach his potential. And sure enough, that seems to be what's happened. He seems about as fast as he was at OSU, and his play strength has increased. It helps him against the run, and it also helps him power guards. So that was something he couldn't do as much of. at OSU. So he can kind of put together a full rush plan. So, and in keeping tabs with him throughout his career, like just here and there, like limited exposure when the Broncos are on TV, watch an occasional game, he'd show up, and also like the clips that circulate on Twitter, he'd show up like, oh, cool, looks like he's being what he could be. That's awesome, good for him. And then this past year, with him being due for a contract, those players get thrusted into the kind of conversation more often, and the general conclusion was that he's a high-end player. And so sure enough, that fit my preconceived notion of him as well as my limited exposure. So yeah, I was happy about the move. And also it signals that they are trying to really improve the defensive line, like get that star player. Like they have a lot of, in my opinion, quality floor players, guys that get you 500 snaps, but they're not intended to be Pro Bowlers. They're not paid like they're intended to be Pro Bowlers. They're guys that every team plays hundreds of snaps with, right? You need those guys, but if you could airdrop in on top of those calibers of player that they always end up finding, a guy like Dre'Mont Jones or a high-end player, then your D-line can really, go from average at best to something better than that in both phases, run and pass. So to me, the idea was, hey, they're finally getting that pass rusher. So I was pretty excited. I went back and started watching his tape, and I guess long story short is I'm pretty underwhelmed. Now I know it's the idea that, and that's just my honest opinion of it. And like I went in primed for wanting to like what I'm seeing, because remember, like I liked this guy before I started watching more in depth. But he's definitely a good pass rusher, but I don't think he's the caliber of player that you're normally seeing getting these contracts. Now the contract is, 3 years, 51 million, but the way it's structured, it really feels more like 2 years, 28 million. So I think they view him more as like a $14 million per year kind of player. And that honestly is closer to what his tape shows me.
Yeah, he gets $30 million guaranteed and $10 million for the first year cap hit.
Right. And then they can save 16.5 million in his third season. So it definitely looks like they're either plan to cut him or restructure in that third year. They're not going to let him play out the year at that number. So they're kind of, I think it's really well structured, because if they get what they have paid for, they'll extend him. If they haven't, there isn't a lot of risk with that third year. They can get out of it pretty easily. And we'll break down what we're seeing from him. I've only seen now 4.5 games of his 2022. So against Seattle, I mean, he's cooking as a pass rusher. Like that is his best ball. Like you want to see as much of that as possible. Against Houston, he was pretty much shut down by their guards. Against Jacksonville, I thought he was shut down with the exception of one play. He had a really good bull rush. Against the Raiders, he has a quality game, like a quality game. He's not crazy or anything, but he's doing things against the run that will really break down. But then as a pass rusher, so some decent bull rushes, some kind of slow mounting corner moves. Like they're not crazy early in the snap wins, but like if the quarterback had to hold the ball for a little bit, it probably would result in a quarterback hit or maybe a sack. So with all that said, like I need to keep watching. Hopefully I see more games like the Seahawks game where he gave their guards trouble. But so I'm kind of cooled a little bit in terms of my excitement. But as a run defender, there are a lot of qualifications there, but he is a little bit better against the run in certain contexts that I thought he would be. Anyway, what was your initial reaction, Matty?
Yeah, similar as though, it's not necessarily massively dominant, but I think what stands out to me is more that he's able to add disruption to plays, not just in the clear passing downs, but like from a variety of different positions at different times. Sometimes you wouldn't expect it to happen, and it does happen. So like head up on a tackle is a 4 technique. Some of his best stuff happens in against the run, where he's able to quick swim into the backfield and blow up the play. And his tackle for loss numbers kind of reflect that as well. Like the fact that he's able to take his shots, and Pete Carroll spoke about kind of being stuck in the same mode up front, and how they kind of need to change things and get guys who can split doubles and get guys who can get into the backfield and penetrate. Now, I don't think Jones is a double team splitter necessarily, but I do think he's someone who can take his shots and penetrate into the backfield and cause kind of a disruption rather than just sort of staying and playing the block or trying to anchor down. I think he kind of fits the different mode that they want. And if you look at his numbers, metrics wise, he had in 2020 an 8.3% pressure percentage per PFF, a 7.5% pressure percentage per SIS. 21, that's 9.5% or 8.9%. And then 22, 10% or 8.6%. Tackle for loss numbers, 9 tackles for loss in 2020, 11 tackles for loss in 2021, 13 tackles for loss in 2022, and then 6.5 sacks in 2020, 5.5 sacks in 2021, 6.5 sacks in 2022. So he has been like consistently productive. That's not like the craziest numbers. Like that's not like the tier 1 or even the tier 2, right? But it is across the board, across those 3 years, but also run and pass causing disruption. And you, Griffin, also you found it was interesting how it's not like his pressure percentage is all coming on 3rd and long. Like it's spread across the board in a nice way where 1st down, 2nd down, 3rd down, he's able to get that. And I think that shows again the point that he is able to, contribute his skill set on all downs. And so for Seattle, like, and just looking at the way he plays and how he fits in Seattle, I think he is more of a 3 tech, but also like a 4i 4 tech guy. You want him to be his one-on-one as much as possible. You don't want him to have to play combination blocks or double teams. He's not that type of player. But when his quickness can win and his hand usage, that's where he's very, very good. He's not as quick as you might think from like the highlights, but he's very good at timing the snap up, and there is some quickness there. It's just not like elite.
Yeah.
And that I don't, I tweeted when it happened that he's comfortable with the mirror stepping techniques that caused issues across the line. Like I don't necessarily think that's right anymore. Like having watched more of him, like he can do it, but it's more that he's able to, from those positions, penetrate. And when he's one-on-one, he's comfortable with it. It's just when, say, a tight end comes to combo him, or say he's playing the 2i or heavy 3 tech and he gets comboed on, say, like duo or something, that's where some issues happen. So, like, he's an interesting sort of player because in terms of the scheme, like, if they're schematically going to run 2-4 over G fronts at the same rate that they did last year in all manner of situations, it'll be a disaster because he can't play as a defensive tackle in a 4 front with 2 wide 9 edges, like reliably in all situations. What he can do is work in odd fronts like bare, tight, whatever, as long as that, because that keeps him one-on-one and he can play aggressive, so power step. But also, like, he can be in certain situations, depending on what set you get, what flank. He can be, on a tackle or even maybe on a tight end and be one-on-one still and penetrate and get upfield. So I really like that situation for him. So to me, it kind of implies that, like, maybe Jones is more the return of the big end to the defense. Maybe that's sort of overanalyzing the move. But ultimately, usage-wise, he has to be playing in more bare and odd fronts. You can't, and so they have to offset their high usage of the 2-4 over G nickel front with more odd fronts. That could be nickel bare fronts like a penny or what they used to call Falcon. But like he has to be one-on-one as a 3 tech or a 4i, and that's where his best reps will happen and where he can cause issues and be disruptive, run and pass. And I think for me, like, he's not, I mean, obviously the numbers go up each time. It's interesting you think of it as a 2-year deal, and, I think that's correct. I think that's the right read of the situation. And you think about, when they signed Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, that's obviously an easy thing to go to because it's so successful. But those at the time are 2-year deals of ascending players where they took a shot and it panned out really well, right? And this
Yeah.
is the same kind of thing where I think Dre'Mont Jones across the league is viewed as an ascending player. I think he, in terms of his production, it's kind of been level for the past 3 years in terms of the metrics. But like, this could be something where if it pans out, then they hit massive. If it doesn't pan out, he's sort of got a reliable baseline floor, and it's only a
Absolutely. Yeah.
2-year deal. So it's not that we're not excited about it. I just adding some analysis, some thought on, it's very exciting that it was such a big deal,
Right.
especially for the Seahawks. It's an interesting change up to how they have in the past approached the position. I think Jones, if he hits, could really hit.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, he is absolutely a useful player. He's a high floor player. To give a little bit more context to like his pressure numbers. So like ESPN pass rush win rate tracking, which is not subjective at all, in that they have a very strict definition, and it's all based on like GPS chip tracking. So it's hard to determine whether or not that's accurate, but it does tend to correlate. The guys that rank highly in it do tend to correlate with guys that we generally think are good, with the occasional like head scratching figure that's way up there or something. So Dre'Mont, he ranks like, what was it, 8th or 9th in that figure. That's pretty good. And then in PFF's, it's technically not pressure rate, it's pass rush productivity, where they weigh sacks and hits slightly higher, but for all intents and purposes it is. So his overall PRP was ranked 11th, and then 13th in win percentage. So that tends to correlate with that tends to match up with ESPN's win rate, right? But then his PFF grade out of 73 players is ranked 36th as his pass rush grade. Now everyone that's listening to this knows how we feel about using pass rush grades indiscriminately in general. But then if you go to his pass rush or his PRP, or his pass rush productivity against true pass sets, he's 21st, and then his win percentage is 24th out of 73. So he's still like in the top third, but it's more like at the bottom of that top third, like in true like pass rush situations. And I think that explains the discrepancy between his overall win rate and PRP, and how PFF is viewing his play overall. That suggests that a good deal of his production is kind of like unblocked, or maybe play action, where it can be kind of funky and stuff. Now there is an art to getting pressure against play action.
And I think he has that art,
He did at OSU, like
right, and I think that is a big factor as well. Like Seattle's play action pass rush has been difficulties for a while, and they need someone who can, again, I keep using the word, but disrupt from the kind of tougher or less typical spots.
Right. And like you said, like he was used everywhere, right? Like a lot of the stuff, like the defense needed him to do that, but like for his sake, you could almost argue he was being sacrificed. Like there weren't a lot of opportunities to get pressure. So in picking out what Denver did, because Denver had a good scheme, but they did what they needed to do, picking out how Seattle needs to tweak things. I think that Seattle can actually provide for him more opportunities to get more clean one-on-one looks. Like, because what does bear defense do? A bear front, it gives you 5 guys, and your ends are B gap players. They're effectively 3 techniques. They're not like the classic 2 gapping 3-4 ends of your, really. Now he'll have to do some 4-eye and 4 technique stuff where he'll have to 2 gap, and we'll look at that. But the meat and potatoes is, and they're the Seahawks 3-4, the 3-4 that when they do run it, the one that they ran with Ken Norton Jr., and the one that they switched to after the first 4 weeks this past season, first 4 or 5 weeks, they have their ends 1 gap, not 2 gap. I think also because there's 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, you're more likely to get a one-on-one with your guard when it's a pass set. So I think they can provide him more one-on-one opportunities, more opportunities to get upfield with a staggered stance, first step being explosively minded. and he can kind of show off what his skill set is, and I could actually see his pressure rate climb. Now, because he can do other things, like you said, Matty, when you were talking about like a return to like, you know, the classic big end usage, the way that they've used them with Red Bryant and Michael Bennett. This past year, we did see them like their check toward like tight end wing sets, like 2 tight ends to one side and everything, was to play an underfront. And so he absolutely fits playing the 5 technique in an underfront when you need to check to that. So,
and they've been doing that for a while. So.
right, and it's totally like it's not foreign to them at all. So he fits that. He does give them that flexibility. Um, that said, I think there's at the same time, I think there's merit to having him opposite the tight end, have him be the weak end so that he's always assured the one-on-one for pass rush purposes, and maybe try to go find a bigger body, because then you might be worried about those double teams that we talked about coming from the tight end on a down block if it's a gap scheme run. So there are just a lot of factors here. I think the best the take home should be that he's versatile. He gives them flexibility, and under the premise that they tweak the scheme as necessary, or basically do what they did in the middle month of the season, which is what they did in 2020 and 2021 in base and nickel. I think he can be really productive, and he can be that player that they want him to be, and he can live up to the contract. But it's dependent on that. If they keep the identical scheme with the identical front usage and the identical personnel packages and all those contexts, the run defense will be even worse. If people thought Puna Ford couldn't play the heavy 2-eye or the heavy 3, Dre'Mont in that context specifically is even worse than Puna as a run defender in that context. So, like, if we're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, if they keep everything the same, the run defense will get even worse. So, provided that they go back to the scheme they should, there can be huge dividends here, but it's all on the premise that they play the scheme that they need to. So, I don't know. Beyond that, I don't have any other like Dre'Mont thoughts. So,
well, on the tackles for loss thing as well, just to add a more advanced statistic to that, Next Gen Stats had Jones recording a 4.5% run stuff rate last season, which was 10th highest among defensive tackles. I've tried looking up what run stuff rate means. I can't find their definition, but I imagine that's similar to getting in the backfield. So also, it sounds like Seattle pushed heavily for Jones, and he told Josina Anderson of CBS Sports, I feel like Seattle has the biggest belief in me. They have a really promising team. I'm looking forward to transitioning to that city. So clearly a big fan of that. I should also say that in Denver, it seemed to end badly. Now, I actually watched the play he got hurt on, and that looked like a nasty, jarred, horrid play where he gets blocked in the back after winning against the center. But it did end badly, and I think there are signs that motor-wise didn't look like he was fully going out for it on certain plays. Griff, you kind of saw similar things to that, right?
yeah, he definitely seemed checked out. Like for like a month stretch. I know I said I only watched so many games, but watching that Jags game, he did not seem. He wasn't like his usual self in his body language. Not to infer too much, because it's hard to know what's going on in the mind of someone. He didn't seem like he was happy to be there. Combined with his tweets and stuff, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if what I'm seeing on tape, where it seems like he's not what I thought he was, is really because he doesn't have his heart in it. And, you know, it makes me want to go back and watch his 2021 stuff. Maybe that's really the true Dre'Mont. And if, you know, he's coming to Seattle and it's all hunky dory, you know, he might be even better. So, yeah, I do think that was a variable though.
Yeah, no doubt. And then as a pass rusher, it's worth mentioning that his style is very much of quickness, hands, and then ripping through. Like, he's 6'2". He has to rip through guys because he's shorter than most offensive linemen. He looks to get hands on and then rip through and wins wide most of the time on guards. If he's going to activate power, he really needs to be kind of stunted into it, or line up wide and then bull rush. Like he's not a power guy. You described him as a finesse guy, Griff. So I think it's worth. What does that mean, Griff?
It's the foundation. So by finesse, it means like when he's a 3 technique lined up on the outside shoulder of a guard, his first step is upfield, pressing the outside shoulder or outside hip, foot, what have you, of the guard. So that's what he's doing first. He's trying to see if he can gain depth on the guard upfield on the outside, and then from there, if he gets position, he's looking to use really technique, like to defeat their hands, to clear their outside shoulders so that he can rip past them or swim over them to then work his way back to the quarterback. Now, again, finesse, rush plans. So if they overset or they defeat him, he has answers. Like I'm watching a play right now against the Chargers. He does the same thing. The guard jump sets him, and he quickly clubs or really slaps the inside arm and then swims over, and he gets in, and he forces Herbert to check it down pretty quickly. So like he knows what he's doing. He knows how to rush the passer. Like that's his calling card. Like he's a technique guy. But like power comes second. So his power works better when his speed is stressed. And that was his problem at OSU. He would have the same rush plan, but when it would be time to convert the power, he didn't have the body for it all the time. Sure enough, like every once in a while he can hit, like he has some devastating bull rushes. They just don't happen that frequently. But he's got some of it though. So it's enough for his theory to work. So, and it's, it maximizes him. So
this is a real example of sort of his stock winning to the point that Griff was making and about him being finesse and what I was saying. So this is second 11 early in the Baltimore game, and you can see here he is lined up as the left 3 technique. Got this wide angle on the guard. He knows that this is pass. 1, it's shotgun. 2, the running back. Is that even a running back? 17 on the Ravens. It might be.
I don't know.
This is the problem with the numbers. Anyway, the split is telling him, everything's telling him pass. This tackle even. So this is sort of the foundation to how he wins.
Yeah.
And this is stuff that we should say, like Shelby Harris showed a bits of stuff like this, right? Like,
I mean, Shelby's just past his prime, but like this was Shelby's game too. Shelby Harris is one of the most productive 3 techniques in the league for a good 4 or 5 years. And he provided a little bit of this. But obviously the idea is that Dre'Mont's way younger and he's going to give you more of it.
And the age is big. Like he's 26 years old. So if he does keep ascending, and again, that's why it reminds me kind of the Bennett Averill stuff.
Right.
And when was the last time Seattle had a guy who would win wide at 3 tech with finesse? I don't remember. A minute.
Probably Jarran Reed 2018.
Yeah.
For that one season.
Yep. So that is exciting as well. Right.
At least of guys that could also play early downs. Yeah, it'd be.
There you go. And as I need to get up some more of the film, but I think that it's been posited that maybe there is potential for this, meaning that Jalen Carter is not the pick for Seattle. I don't buy into that. Like, I think immediately, okay, this guy's an interior disruptor. Jalen Carter's an interior disruptor. Seattle no longer has a need at the position. But like, Carter's more of a defensive tackle, like in terms of you could play him in that 2-eye, you can play him in the 3 tech. You will find thinking
you could play him at 0 technique even.
Yeah, he could play like legitimately across the line. Now, Dre'Mont Jones can play across the line, but not necessarily in all situations, and not as a 1 tech or 0 tech nose tackle. And you worry about him on combos. But Carter's much more of a defensive tackle. Jones much more of like a 3-4 end, or like a, what the 5 tech or big end was called in Seattle's old 4-3 defense. So it doesn't really, it's more a pick that it ensures that they have depth in that kind of 3-4 end area the draft is actually quite deep in, and it's quite funny as well. Like we mentioned, well, you mentioned on your Twitter, Griff, how that 2019 draft, it was full of kind of big end 5 tech candidates. You had Rashawn Gary, you had Dre'Mont Jones, you had Charles Omenihu, you had Zach Allen, who also got paid, and we'll talk about him in relation to the Seahawks. And then the guys who went before all of them, LJ Collier, remember him, and Jerry Tillery, the first 2 taken in that draft, they didn't pan out, but all the other ones did. So
yeah,
that's fun.
I mean, I someone corrected me. Gary was taken before those, but then he is not a big end anymore. He's an outside linebacker, more of an edge.
Oh yeah. That's
So,
what are you talking about? Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
so in that, is it a classic John Schneider overcorrection? No, probably not, but they would have felt burned in that draft. And I think the way that they're approaching this, so Quinton Jefferson was released today. Adam Schefter reported Seattle saved basically $4.5 million doing that move. Poona Ford is still unsigned, and Shelby Harris has been released and Seattle saves some money against the cap. I can't find exactly how much, but they saved money against the cap doing that. He may return to the team, but there's talk that they explored a trade of him. And is this move like a big free agency signing, especially after that offseason where they kept their guys together and they re-signed Poona Ford, they re-signed Brian Monet, that they've really tried to keep their own in-house. Is this now like an overcorrection of, well, we're going to let the whole kind of front 7 walk because we'll get onto the inside linebacker situation. They've even let running backs walk. Is this an overcorrection? Because Bob Condotta of the Seattle Times, he reported that the Seahawks also made a serious run at Zach Allen, who got paid incidentally by Denver for fairly similar contract figures. But they simply couldn't find a way to make it work financially to bring in both Dre'Mont Jones and Allen. And Jones was their top target. So it's kind of wild that Seattle was that aggressive at fixing the interior of the defensive line.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, is it an overreaction kind of to answer that? I only know how to answer that by turning into two different conversations, like run defense and pass rush. If it's pass rush, no. I mean, if you want to, you had a problem with your 4-man rush, you can only improve that really by getting the guys for it. And they definitely didn't have the guys to have a potent 4-man rush. So you need dudes for that. If it's run defense, then letting all these guys go, then maybe it is a little bit of an overreaction. Now, there are questions there because as much as I appreciated Shelby Harris, you can't pay him that cap hit. You need to cut him and see if you can bring him back for like $5 million. Essentially what they gave Reed. And we'll talk about Reed. Poona Ford, I mean, he's an unrestricted free agent, right? And I don't know what his market will be. I'm sure that league-wide will view him as having a down year, so that should make him cheaper. But, we can isolate Poona Ford's performance. When they played 3-4, Poona Ford is still Poona Ford. When they didn't play 3-4, when they put him in bad situations, he was bad. But you know who was even worse in those situations? Dre'Mont Jones. So, this past year, it's just Ejiro Evero didn't play Dre'Mont Jones in those situations that I just mentioned very much. So, I don't like what I'm saying. I feel like should be obvious, and it feels asinine to say, well, does John Schneider know that? But how does he perceive this? It doesn't need to be rocket science. We can simply they know their own internal numbers. They know what opponent yard per carry is when they play bear, which is 3-4, or even tight to start the season. They were still average in it, and they switched from tight to bear, and they were even better in bear. So the whole thing is perplexing to me. I think it's less of a performance review and more of just a cap consideration thing. And I think that they're still going to make another move in addition to Jarran Reed. I think Jalen Carter is still in play, at least for football reasons. Again, there's a lot up in the air now. There's probably a lot of stuff that we don't know. But football reasons, this doesn't preclude them because they still have, they lost 4 guys. They've only gained 2. So the fourth being Brian Monet. They cut Quinn Jefferson. Poona Ford's unrestricted free agent, currently not signed with anyone, and they obviously cut Shelby Harris. So they've lost 4. They've only gained 2. They need to find 2 more. yeah, you could easily draft 2, but I don't know
That's
if
risky,
it's risky
especially if you're
and
playing 3 of these guys like most of the time.
right,
But
right.
all pro Seahawks very kindly donated $5. Appreciate that. And with a question, would you guys say if Seattle picks Jalen Carter, that this defensive line could be one of the best in the league, as in very high ceiling? Absolutely yes. However, as Griff said, there's obviously off the field stuff. There's the incident that's been reported. We've heard some other things. We'll see what comes of that. Where really is the part of the draft process which isn't very fun for us and not very interesting for you guys to hear, which is yeah, he's the best player in the draft. However, like, there's a lot of intangibles that go into being a good football player that we are very in a poor position to judge, given that we don't get to interview the guy. It's also, if I was working for a team, it would be hell to unpack all of that stuff. And maybe Seattle decides they don't want that problem, especially of how they've been burned in the past. So thank you so much for the donation. But yeah, the D line with Carter on it, if you try and remove all that other stuff, would be incredible. Like because
Yeah.
Carter's incredible. But
I
yeah,
mean, yeah. I mean, Carter is the when we say like, oh, to make the over G stuff work, you need this guy and that guy
yeah,
to even be passable. He's one of those guys.
he's the guy
So
who can BS that. Yeah,
yeah,
and did for Georgia.
it's yeah. I mean, so like when we go back to the 24 or 2015 Seahawks defense, they played this front. Now they did play it in single high the whole time, like gapped out,
Hmm.
so that makes it easier. Like, yeah, Seattle's numbers in it were relatively better. Seattle's problem this year is that they played this front paired with too high a lot. So that was kind of the core issue. But one of the reasons why that front worked so well was not because of, ironically, not because of their interior guys. They just had decent guys. But Michael Bennett was I mean, he was a top 5 run defender in the league that year. So,
Yeah,
I mean, he just makes plays. So, like, you need a guy that just absolutely devastates, and Carter would be one of those guys. And Dre'Mont is in the spirit of that, although he's not entirely that. Although there is a way they could use him in 2-4 that could make him closer to that, but we're not talking about that this moment. I think you got a play queued up here, though.
yeah. So here we have Dre'Mont as the head up 4 technique. Again, similar to Seattle, there's only so many ways to play defense, but on the left here you have 2 tight ends. So this probably would have looked like excuse me, this probably would have looked like a bear look where this guy would have been head up, this guy Jones would have been a 3 technique, this guy would have been a 3 technique, but because of the pair tight ends, they've sort of bumped over towards it. And this head up position is where you see, rather than a 6-inch forward step, knock the crap out the guy and play as shade and stay outside of him and do not get reach blocked, win your B gap. Because you're head up, you take more of a 6-inch lateral step and then you mirror his angle of departure and try and stay in play and play a gap and a half, or basically 2 gap. Now, if we watch Jones play this technique, and where he has difficulty is when this tight end comes and has to combo him. That's a difficult assignment, right? But this is a good play that Griff's found.
Yeah. So I mean, I was critical and said you don't want him mirror stepping a lot, you don't want him 2-gapping a lot. But on 1-on-ones, when he's engaged with tackles, he actually does
Yes.
really well. He wins leverage. He has the anchor for it. And he has the technique for it. He was actually way more technically proficient than I thought he'd be. I mean, look at his hand placement. He gets them, I think actually, so like Clint Hurt, he likes the hand supinated. So his hand, like where you're more like this with thumbs up, it looks like his hands are more like he's making a 90-degree angle. Now, Clint Hurt may not like that, but point being is the hand placement's great. Look at the hip level, look at the pad level, all that. Then he's able to control the block and shed to get to the ball, right? That's what 2-gapping is all about, play inside out. So that's a really good rep. The only problem is that when he's mirror stepping in that exact look, if that tight end down blocked on him, he gets sent flying.
Yeah.
So,
And you know what? Look, the big thing there is to keep your outside pad down, but his outside pad is high when he strikes
mm,
guys. He kind of exposes it a bit more than he some perhaps could avoid doing that to an extent. So maybe that's a hand strike thing as well, because if you strike with the thumbs up again, it's keeping you lower, right? It's
Right.
above your head, it's above your eyes.
Right.
Whereas this is more kind of out. But yeah, this is impressive because guys, here he technically has, and in Seattle system, how they've taught in the past, technically he still has this B gap, but if the ball is going to cut back, then you bounce back into the C, and that's exactly what he did here. And it's what I was saying as well. When he's 1-on-1 in the 4-eye or 4-tech position, he's fine. It's just when that outside pad gets high and a tight end comes in, he gets knocked around a bit.
Right. So that's a good example of like down in, down out stuff, being able to hold the line, showing like the natural anchor that he has. Because really, I mean, he's not 300 pounds. He's not even, well, like a lot of those guys are more than 300 pounds. He's not even 300. He's not even 290. So I mean, those guys can lose ground, and this is an example where obviously he doesn't, and it shows that he can do that. There are a lot of guys that are 280, 285 that can't. Like, so it's good that he can.
Now, last play we'll talk about for Jones here. He's a 3 technique, and this is this 2-4-5 front. Now, Denver's running this because it's the start of a 2-minute drill. It's 1st and 10. And here's the 2, 1, 2, and then here's the 4 linebackers, because it's a 3-4 system. And you can see how Jones is a 3 tech, and you have a 2-eye here, beautifully drawn from me, under center formation. And this is an example of his lateral quickness. Or maybe this is the wrong play.
No, that's the not good play.
That's the bad play.
That's the Puna Ford did nothing wrong play.
Oh, well, that was the timestamp.
That's the no. Do the do 41-17.
I thought this was a mirror stepping play.
41-17 is the other mirror stepping play where he gets into the backfield.
Okay, there's no lateral.
So this is same alignment, same assignment, right? He's 2-gapping.
Yep.
But this shows how he, even from like an even stance that he has right now, where it's not conducive toward getting north and into the backfield,
No,
right?
it's sideways.
He can use his lateral suddenness to still get into the backfield and create something disruptive. So it's one thing to stop the offense from making a positive play, but it's another to be able to do that and still find ways to be negative. And this is him causing a negative play as well. So like, even when Seattle had a good run defense in 2020, 2021, and when they played Bear in 2022, they weren't able to be penetrative in it. So like they would hold the line really well, but they wouldn't create like negative explosives, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an example of him able to do that. So even though technically Denver's not in Bear right here, or they're in 3-4 personnel, but it's technically like under space in a way because the nose tackle's playing a 1.
Yeah.
If you just imagine 98 playing a 0 technique, then boom, it's all of a sudden it's Seattle's Bear with the check into a 4 because you got a tight end. So this is an example of, hey, they can actually create negative plays here. And Nwosu is another guy who can create negative plays. So now they've got 2 guys that can create negative plays on top of everyone else just being solid. As much as people want to disagree, like in this picture right here, when Seattle ran the identical front, more or less, Puna Ford, Shelby Harris did fine. They were absolutely fine, but they weren't getting into the backfield. So Jones can get into the backfield here. Now, if Puna was playing nose like he did in 2020, he absolutely was getting in the backfield. And that's what makes bringing him back exciting, because you compare him with Dre'Mont on the field at the same time.
Yep.
And then you draft Carter, then you're really cooking. But
yeah, and this 4-tech play from Jones here, he does this against the pass, like play action stuff too. I think for me, this is the biggest thing he brings. This is why you sign him. You don't necessarily sign him for the okay, the three tech like passing down stuff, that's an added bonus, but this kind of ability to disrupt against the run, and then the layers off that, the play fakes, that's the big deal for me because they, as you said, Griff, they haven't had that, and
Right.
it's
Because he
literally what Pete Howard spoke
understands.
about getting.
Yeah, he understands blocking schemes.
Yeah.
So
So there you go. Right. Now, other things did happen on the D line. And before we get to that, All Pro Seahawks, thank you again for the donation. What about Anderson at number 5 and Keon White at 20 overall? We spoke about Anderson. We did a whole podcast. Check it out on Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, or Tyree Wilson. Anderson, I was a bit more down on than I expected to be, but I can talk myself into that. And then Keon White, we will cover. We will have an edge episode. We were planning to do that this Tuesday, and then we remembered it's free agency. So that should come later this week where we talk Keon White. And interesting, really, how this draft, like, there's a lot of kind of 3-4 ends. And I'd love, Griff, on that Thursday to talk about, how they compare to this 2019 class, which is now all getting paid of the kind of 5 tech types. But we can do that on Thursday. Now, other things on the defensive line. So we talked about how Quentin Jefferson got released. We talked about how Shelby Harris got released. We've talked about Poona Ford. Seattle did pick up Jarran Reed. They've signed him to a 2-year deal with a max of $10.8 million. That is a bit more than I thought it would be, given that he had like a down year supposedly in Green Bay, and I've seen a few of his clips and was like, "Oof, that's some rough stuff going on." But Reed brings, I think, a mentality to the locker room that they didn't replace when he fell out of the front office over his perceived worth, and now he's back. I think that's a big locker room presence add. We know Clint Hurt loves him. Like, Clint Hurt was so upset when they let Jarran Reed walk, not just for his leadership, but also the fact that he is, he tries hard. He really fights against the run and selfless as a pass rusher. But yeah, mainly the kind of alpha mentality on the field that I think Hurt was clearly a massive fan of. So that's a big re-signing in that aspect. But in terms of playing, and I'm sure he won't earn $10.8 million. The incentives will be interesting in that, and the price of stuff like that is going up. Like, it's not as much as it may first seem.
So my perception is the same as yours, that he's not as good as against the run as he was when he left. But I offer some cause for cope there, I think, because if we go back to the year that he had 10.5 sacks, 2018, as a Seahawk, that was also probably his worst year as a run defender. Now, he wasn't bad. He just wasn't as good as he was the year before. He wasn't as good as he was the 2 years after. So the conclusion there is that it seemed like he was trying to put as much as he could into pass rush, and it came at the expense of his run defense. Sure enough, when his run defense recovers, his pass rush tanks the following 2 years, right? So I feel like it's just he can't be the complete player he wants to be. But then he goes to Kansas City, and they're all about pass rush. They often have bad run defense. Chris Jones, Frank Clark, they all get after it, right? So I think he's thinking like, hey, I want to get after and be a pass rusher again. So I remember just watching him on the broadcast and on like when Kansas City was on primetime games and stuff in 2021, and be like, man, Reed isn't, like, his anchor's gone. This looks a lot like 2018 again. So I'm thinking he's just trying to be a pass rusher. So, and then now I didn't watch him in Green Bay, but I suspect, I mean, everyone that I've spoken to that has watched him they do not have good things to say. They're saying he's not as good as he was. But I'm wondering, is it he's trying to be a pass rusher and he can't? And even if he could be a pass rusher, he never was able to be a pass rusher and a run defender at the same time. So one thing we do know is that he's capable of having very good like run technique. That's stuff you can control. Even if like the traits aren't there, you can still control your technique. So the thinking is with this, like, they're not bringing him in to be a pass rusher, right? So I'm thinking Clint Hurst, like, well, he knows how to play the position, and they're only going to bring him in if there's a commitment to playing the run. And if that deal is incentive laden, he has every reason to try to reestablish himself as a run defending force, of which he was never elite at, but he was high quality, right? So, I mean, that's where my thinking goes. But so I just hope that he's all in on being a run defender pretty much, and he's not trying to get upfield, not trying to jump the snap, and he's just reading his keys and just playing blocks the way he should. So that's where my mind goes. Now, I do want to watch him in Green Bay and try to look for that. Like, is he trying to jump the snap? Is he trying to put his eggs in one basket? That being getting upfield more instead of, you know what I mean? So
Yeah, and if anyone can sort of recalibrate him as a player, hurt and clearly they had a connection, that should be able to work out. And he turns 31 years old in May, but in December, sorry, but the way I view that is Jefferson. The reason Jefferson got cut, like if Jefferson had played the run like okay and bought that pass rush juice, there's no way they'd have cut him. And he did bring
right,
pass rush juice, but the problem was he was like basically a liability against the run.
right,
Like
right.
absolutely awful, like really bad. Like you just spoke about guys looking to rush the passer and not do other things as well. Jefferson is an example of that. And yes, he was put in some poor situations. And we should say about Reed, like his best run D work, the technique stuff you speak about, Griff, that we saw in Seattle, that came out of the fronts that we predict Seattle will be going back into. So 2020, Reed had really solid run defenses, the 3 technique, and obviously good enough to inspire confidence in him asking for a raise, which didn't happen. And obviously he then ended up on the Kansas City Chiefs. But that was in 3-4 looking bare fronts, playing a 3 technique and absolutely smacking guys back. Now, interestingly, when Seattle was doing that, so they were the 3-4 front, the bare front, the 2-3 techniques, the 5 guys down the line. Am I back?
Oh, we good? Yeah, you're here.
I got so excited I knocked my mic out. When they were doing that, it was still in 4-3 personnel. So basically, and this isn't very basic, but Reed was away from the Leo defensive end, so Carlos Dunlap. He was to the Sam linebacker, which was, if you remember back in those days, it was KJ Wright down at the line of scrimmage, which meant when Seattle had to adjust, they didn't bump the 3 technique outside because there was a guy rushing in Dunlap. They bumped the guy opposite the other 3 technique outside. So he's still lining up as a 3 technique, but he was technically the big end or the 5 tech, playing 3 tech. But then when they need to bump out, so play under, or if they got empty and they needed to get into a 4 down front for pass rush purposes, that guy would go outside the tackle. And Reed got a load of those assignments. So he is versatile and experienced to, and obviously he's played loads of football too, but it's cool that we've seen him do the things well in Seattle that he's now going to be doing again, we presume, because there is no way that they can run the 2-4-5 nickel over G as their every front in a static nature as well. There's just no way. The Pete Harris
Versus
comes,
11, yeah.
and they've obviously gone massive on personnel, like getting different personnel in, but also schematically they've got to go massive. They've got to blend in 2020, 2021 a lot more than they did last year.
And the thing is, if they recommit to doing that, then theoretically they're setting up more second and longs where you can merit playing 2-4-5, and then you get more out of it when you do use it. So, I mean, you got to take care of business on 1st and 10 and 2nd and short, 2nd and medium, then set up the 2nd and longs and the 3rd and mediums, the 3rd and longs. Because even their 3rd down run defense was so bad because teams they catch them in the 2-4-5, which makes sense to call on 3rd and 4. But then a simple draw play would go for 6 yards, or they just run straight up inside zone, or a counter play for an explosive on 3rd and 7, even like take the Panthers game, for example. So, yeah, they have to figure the scheme out, and it starts there. But yeah, you got to replace these snaps. So, I mean, Reed it could be fine, I mean, and a lot of this really depends on what the opportunity cost is, because it depends on what Shelby Harris costs. Like, I mean, I think Harris is probably better than Reed, but he might cost twice the amount, you know? Maybe they can still bring Puna Ford back. Like he's so proven in what they should be and what they want to be. I would even pay him $8 million a year, but they can't invest too much at the position. So it just depends.
Yeah, and we should mention as well that Miles Adams is still under contract with the team. I think he's on one of these tender deals, and he is like an end kind of depth for the team who can, play the kind of three tech. That's where his best football is, three tech, and then a bit of five tech. But yeah, they with Brian Monet coming off a bad knee injury, like Carroll was described that quite seriously, that ACL injury. He wasn't that optimistic. It didn't sound. Getting more nose depth would be a smart idea. There's also Jared Hewitt, who had like up and down okay preseason in his first year of football, who's more of like a three tech kind of dude. So they could definitely use one or two more bodies, and I'm sure they'll bring them in. There is also, of course, the draft and Reed's contract, as glitchy as the numbers read. If you look at it, really, it's like 1 year's $4 million. So it's not crazy amounts, and Harris maybe will return as well. Now, Griff, still focusing on the front seven, but looking at the second level, the inside linebacker position is scaring me. So,
Yeah.
Jordan Brooks is coming off an ACL injury, which we knew was going to happen, and supposedly he's making great progress. That's the accounts that we've heard from Pete Carroll, and that's great, and that's brilliant. He plays the Mike linebacker position. Seattle in base defense. Now they'll play nickel a fair bit, even if it's not 2-4-5, but it's 3-3-5 in a bear look. They'll only need one inside linebacker, but they still have a base defense of 3-4. They still need a second inside linebacker, and right now that is Tanner Muse or John Rattigan. Or is Tanner Muse even under contract?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't think he is. I think Rattigan got one of these tender waiver things. But anyway, so the depth is a problem, and we sort of presumed, oh well, Cody Barton, who played solid / good football, albeit had two dodgy open field moments which stick in the mind, but he played good football when he was off the ball, which was his position he was drafted to play in 2021 and 2022. For some reason, he became like a bizarre scapegoat of the whole defensive failings in a way that often happens, unfortunately, with sports fandom. But we both really liked what he brought to the team, particularly the coverage options he allowed Seattle to play in base. Typically you wouldn't have both linebackers who can carry routes deep, but Barton was able to do that, and his safety background showed up. And yeah, he got blamed by many people for that big Raiders ending run when it wasn't really on him. Regardless, the Washington Commanders signed Cody Barton to a 1-year, $3.5 million deal in the first wave of free agency. There's also an additional $1 million available in incentives. So he's gone. And that is slightly surprising because money-wise, that looks doable. Like if they really wanted to do it, they could do it. And all the other inside linebackers have been signed up. So Leighton Van Der Esch went, Eric Kendricks went. They're all going. They've all gone.
I mean, they're all gone now. I would like we talked about Aziz Al-Shair. So like he plays Sam. It's hard to evaluate him because he's not asked to do things, but he at least has a skill set. You almost view him as like a prospect and go, well, translate him to the scheme. Can they coach him up? But even guys like that are gone now.
Yeah, he's gone. Yeah.
So,
also, do you want to just talk about Barton, or are you done with Barton?
Well, so one thing we should say though is because we can watch other Fangio teams, we can watch what they do in coverage. All those teams, they are only able to cloud the side to their when it's like nickel, say 2-4-5 or 4-2-5 nickel. Forget about the run for a second, like third downs and stuff. when they have nickel packages that involve two linebackers on the field, they can only do interesting things with the slot defender to the nickel side. So that because that, as in carry routes, because they don't have a linebacker that can carry routes. Like when we say, oh, he can carry routes, it isn't just some like nebulous like football tape nerd guy who just likes to say that about linebacker. Like it's not just something like that. All those teams, they can't do anything to the slot formation or the two receiver side opposite the nickel. And thus offenses always know that it's going to be quarters to that side. Or they cloud it, but then they know that guy's just going to be a spot dropping curl defender. So Seattle had the rare scenario where their Mike and their Will can carry routes. That made them like, for the half quarter, half teams, that made them like ambidextrous, and that they could have Cody do things that like you could ask a nickel to do. So that like he was matching things with inside leverage and outside leverage, like running like brackets even on a tight end occasionally on 3rd and 8 or whatever. Yeah, you can't do that with like watching these other schemes. They don't do anything. Like Alex Singleton is a flat defender. He's just jetting out to the flat snap after snap. Bobby Wagner is put at will and nickel on like not bare nickel or tight nickel, but like 2-4-5, 4-2-5 nickel, and they're just having him hug the running back. Like that's the extent of what they do. So like all these schemes, even though they don't emphasize linebacker play, they're getting figured out by good offenses when they themselves don't have elite personnel, because they're so like predictable. And we think about, oh, Fangio, too high numbers in the passing game, multiplicity, lack of predictability, but they're getting really predictable when you can't do a lot with your linebackers. And
and especially if team offenses get into heavier personnel to then force them into base, then that's where the mismatch gets picked on. But like like the Chargers tried that against Seattle, and Barton's basically kind of made Seattle's defensive game plan complete. It joined it all up, and it gave them more answers than the Chargers had, an answer for every question they posed. So, but it's sad, and it kind of sucks, and
it's concerning for another reason, because are they then saying the run defense wasn't good enough because the performance wasn't good enough relative to what was being schemed, or was the scheme putting them in a bad situation? Like, does this signal we need to find a better linebacker for the precise scenarios? Like, are they taking the wrong lesson from it?
Well, when we saw like the drop off from Barton to Tanner Muse and who came in, they like signed guys off the streets and stuff, and like typically Fangio teams don't value the off-ball linebacker position, and there's more of like an emphasis on the D line, which is like a philosophical roster building thing. Maybe Seattle's.
Which sorry to cut you off, but like I agree that I think it's more of a economics thing and not what they think about football, because when they had Roquan Smith, they were using him to the full extent in Chicago. When we say the words or the name Vic Fangio, my mind goes to San Francisco 49ers. And who are the best players on that team? Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis. And so like this notion that they don't use linebackers, I feel like that was a Brandon Staley interview taken out of context, and him responding to the players at his disposal. And then the way that the market is going right now, and the fact that there aren't a lot of 240-pound human beings that run 4.4s, So, but anyway,
there you go. So, yeah, it's interesting. Like, are they planning to offset that with, if Jamal Adams is healthy? Are they planning to just run even more nickel and that kind of deal? You know what? As well, maybe they draft the safety. Like Schneider spoke about how big nickel was taking over in the league. I think it was on the radio, and he said about how Dallas and what Dan Quinn's doing with big safeties is interesting. And so maybe Seattle delves more into that world. Really, with how the NFL draft is looking, we're not that big on the inside linebackers. We will preview the position. It's obviously a massive hole on the roster right now. Like, maybe they just view it as something where we're not going to run that much base 3-4, so we can just get a guy who's a thumper and we're happy to give up the coverage versatility that means, and that's that. We'll try and run more nickel bear and fire zones. Maybe they'll fire zone more in base to and send that guy and let Brooks handle more in terms of the coverage stuff. But it's just a bit, it's a bit surprising that they have gone this light at the position, even with all those factors in there. So the one remaining person, oh god, the one remaining person as Dakota. Thank you so much for the donation, Dakota. I remember you. You're very kind. On a percent scale, what is the likelihood that the Seahawks sign Bobby Wagner? 80% sure, 90% sure. I'd have said at the start of free agency, like 2%. And like, if you had heard Schneider talk about it on the radio, he was like, yeah, we talked, we had some frank discussions. It didn't sound like they were going to be that interested. They were sort of just hearing Bobby out. He's obviously his own representative. That's really cool. And yeah, they probably just talking. But now the big thing was the Dallas Cowboys were interested in Wagner, and that seemed like a really cool fit because he could like play in their man-to-man coverage looks. He could be put in situations where he's basically rushing the back. If the back releases, then he covers the back out of the backfield, but he's rushing, he's playing downhill. The way that they use Micah Parsons in base, where they play bear, but Parsons is off the ball, Wagner could basically do that, and then you free up Parsons to play as back down on the line of scrimmage. He's like a complement for that, and also take some snaps off Parsons. Basically turning him into like a blitzing weapon where he has very easy coverage assignments, that sort of stuff. So when it comes to Wagner in Seattle, though, because the Cowboys re-signed Leighton Van Der Esch, they no longer have a need at linebacker. Wagner in Seattle is a bit worrying because of the reasons we've already talked about. Like, this is horrid to do because he's a Seahawks legend. He should be in the Ring of Honor. He's one of my favorite players of all time. He literally made what the Seahawks are doing on defense possible. Like, there's very few people who at their prime could turn and run in the way he did, not just in the weak hook of cover three, carrying the three receiver up and back, but some of his drops in the strong hook where he got under flood or like sail combinations and dealt with the issues of that downfield was absolutely brilliant. But my word, Wagner as a player right now is, well, he's an all-pro, Griff. So weird that an all-pro would have very little interest after having an all-pro season and also be released from his contract by said team. But he can't run anymore, and he can't move, and his lateral agility was waning in 2021. As much as it hurt for Seattle to move on from him, as much as it hurt to see him go to a divisional rival, we acknowledged that this was the right time to move on because he couldn't do the things that they were asking in coverage. Okay, as I said, Seattle's running a coverage system that better suits Wagner now. Like, they hug the back. They don't, in cover three, ask their linebackers to take as much conflict. They kind of hug the check down more. They don't get as much depth in their zones. They play kind of in a tighter space. But we saw Wagner in this coverage system, basically the same coverage system last year, and the Rams had to scheme around him. And there was a number of times where players on the Rams seemed to think Wagner would play something, and he didn't because he couldn't. There's times where he was playing you'd have him, he'd give up a lot of space because he has to just play up and back to then rally down to the check down because he doesn't have speed. Yeah, I don't want to keep talking about it because it is an unfortunate truth, and I don't like doing it. But he cannot move in the way that Seattle would need their linebackers to move. And if they're going to sign him, then he is a very kind of 1.5 dimensional player, and obviously incredibly intelligent, incredible experience, veteran leadership, football intelligence, seen it all, massively liked, great guy. Interesting how he brought in his books to press conferences and told the beat reporters about the kind of the beat, the books he was reading. but on the field, it's rough out here. And like, there's just watch the Rams versus the 49ers at home and with McCaffrey, and then watch the Rams versus the Seahawks. Both those games with the
Yeah.
Seahawks at the Rams as well. Both those games are like, this guy is limiting what the Rams are able to do coverage wise, and also just limiting the whole defensive structure. Like
And
I've
then,
said enough. I've had enough. I don't want this to
yeah.
happen. If it happens, it's going to be unfortunate because I think it's not how it should go down,
Right. And what is the percent chance? I mean, at this point, with there being like no one, like the cupboards are bare at linebacker free agency. If they're going to sign someone, I mean, he might be the only guy left at this point. So, I mean, yeah, it would legitimately be concerning because like, I mean, Raheem Morris, the reason why he was able to be so aggressive against the run was because they made his coverage responsibility. They structured their whole defense so that Bobby only ever had the running back or was covering a zone responsible for where the running back normally goes. So because of that, he could be very aggressive against the run. And sure enough, he was productive, but it was at the expense of his own coverage because his run defense would take him to his pass coverage. So like what he was asked to do in pass coverage wasn't very valuable. And then on top of that, it greatly, hamstrung what the full extent of what the Rams could do. Sure enough, they had a really bad pass defense this past year. Now it's not all Bobby. There was lots of things going on. And then even in spite of that, Shane Waldron's game plan was trying to isolate Wagner, trying to take Morris out of doing what he was doing with Bobby and putting Bobby back in those precarious situations. The results weren't good for the Rams, at least that first game. So, that's just kind of what was going on. Now, Lee LaRiviere just put in the chat, Levante David. I watched Levante David a couple of games of his, and he's still a good player. He's not as fast as he used to be, but you could still be a good player at linebacker and not be as fast as he used to be. His change of direction is pretty good. The long speed is gone though. So
yeah,
maybe you can't have him matching routes, but his spot dropping is really good. His run defense is still really good. So he lets you be flexible.
Because that's the thing with Bobby, which was so stark in 2021. His like agility had just disappeared.
Levante still has a good enough agility. So I mean, he misses a couple of tackles, but that's kind of his range. With his anticipation, puts him in situations where it's like a diving tackle situation. So I don't know how much I should hold that against him, but I mean, he's just a solid player. Now they can't go pay him. They can't give him the contract that the Rams gave Bobby last year. They can pay him $5 million at most, and I don't even know if that's smart with what else they can maybe do in free agency. So I don't know. I don't know. It really feels like we're gonna have to dig into this linebacker class, which doesn't feel great.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll talk about it, but Jack Campbell tested incredibly well, but I don't know how. And he's kind of his tape is the antithesis of what the Seahawks would look for in an inside linebacker. It's completely against like the sideline to sideline, can run downfield routes, is really fast into the backfield kind of tape. Now, maybe that's the new kind of prototype of linebacker that they're looking for to complement Brooks, but I'd be surprised. He also has very short arms, which I mean, it does show up. Like he makes it work with how he takes blocks on and wins through them. But yeah, it's the NFL, so that's something to think about. Dayan Henley was really impressive at Senior Bowl in coverage, but like I don't I wasn't as impressed with his tape.
So
and he's very light, so so we'll delve into that. Anyway, it's a bit of a thing, and I'm very surprised, and we weren't impressed with our brief overview of the inside linebacker class. So did they expect to be in this position? I mean, I don't know. Good for Cody though. Like he gets to go play in Washington behind Montez Sweat, Darren Payne, Jonathan Allen, Chase Young. Like, and I don't know. It'd be interesting. Is he their Sam? Is he their Will? Is he their Mike? He might
Yeah.
be their Mike. Like, I don't know what a Cole Holcomb is. Cole Hokum. I don't know who that is, but he might be their Mike. So good for him, and hopefully he proves it in Washington. Anyway,
And it probably signals that Ken Norton Jr. put in a good word with him, because Ken Norton Jr. is buddies with Jack Del Rio, the defensive coordinator in Washington. So I don't know. There's some connection there.
that's how it works. Okay. To the offense. The Eagles signed former Seahawks running back Rashad Penny to a 1-year, $1.35 million deal with $600,000 guaranteed and a maximum value of $2.1 million. So that's a bummer. Now, could Seattle have offered more money than that? Sure. Now, they obviously have Kenneth Walker III. The big thing there is Penny is signing for a team who was in the Super Bowl, have a great offensive line, and he would be in theory, showcase back. The Eagles did sign another back as well. It might have been Boston Scott, but Penny should be the number one if he can stay healthy. And that if he can stay healthy is the big question mark, because he's averaged over 6 yards per carry, but he's had so many injuries over the years. But best of luck to him, because at his best, we saw what he could be. And it was so cool knowing that the Seahawks had Penny as the starter and then as a kind of explosive home run hitter, but also really improved as kind of eking out yards as well. And then had this kind of amazing rookie and Walker. Such a shame he got injured again last year. Maybe this is Seattle saying, okay, you're 26 now. We don't think you can stay healthy for a full season. But like at that money, like the Eagles really have nothing to lose making that kind of signing of just $600,000 guaranteed money. And it's slightly surprised Seattle didn't try and make it work. But then, like, how much more money would you have had to offer Penny for him to stick around in a like worse situation for his opportunity? Griff, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would have liked to have brought him back, but I mean, for what he signed in Philadelphia, I mean, they could have done that easily if they wanted to. So they clearly didn't want to. So I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't have any thoughts beyond that. Lee in the group chat makes a good point. Maybe he didn't want to split snaps with Walker. I mean, yeah, like you said, he gets to be the lead back there, so maybe that was a variable. But also my thinking is, well, given his injury history, does he feel like splitting snaps is actually good for himself? I don't know. So the wear and tear isn't there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And Seattle's running back room is even lighter because Travis Homer is leaving. He's signed a 2-year deal worth a maximum of $4.5 million with the Chicago Bears. That is good for Homer.
Yeah, good for
He's
him.
obviously had few offensive snaps carrying the football relatively, but as a pass protector and then as a special teamer as well, and just a kind of gritty guy, try hard guy. Homer was a very, very valuable contributor. That just really you should be able to draft that. And
yeah, not a guy you need to bring back.
It isn't, and good for him that he got some money from another team. And will Seattle address running back in free agency? Potentially. Jamal Williams is available. The Detroit Lions, they signed someone. I can't remember who they signed. Oh, David Montgomery. So, there's still some interesting free agent names out there. Have to see what happens. Obviously, the draft, you should be able to get a pass protection back. And Seattle should be able to coach a guy up. So we'll see what happens there. If worst comes to worst, Nick Ballore can be an emergency pass protecting back. Like,
right.
We'll have something to monitor though, and Bijan Robinson is quite a good player in the draft. If the Seahawks want to annoy people with their first round pick, that would be nice. And finally, away from free agency, the Seahawks announced the mystery secondary coach, and they also announced their 2023 coaching staff and sort of gave people titles. So we wondered if it had been Ed Donatel, because if it would be Ed Donatel, because Pete Carroll mentioned how this guy had worked with previous coaches. But instead, it's a really cool hire. It's a 42-year-old called Roy Anderson, who has worked with coaching safeties in the past. Amazing background. So in 2004, he was a grad assistant for LSU under Nick Saban. From 2005 to 2007, he was a player personnel assistant at the Baltimore Ravens under Rex Ryan. He stuck around in Baltimore to coach as a defensive assistant, where he was with Greg Mattison and Chuck Pagano. Chuck Pagano took him to the Colts to be a safeties coach, where he worked under Greg Minuski as well. He then was in the Vic Fangio tree the year after Fangio left the 49ers and became a safeties coach there in 2016. And then he joined the Chicago Bears 2017 to 2018, working under Vic Fangio himself with Clint Hurt, with oh no, Sean Desai is not on the Seahawks anymore, but would have been with Sean Desai, so people knew him as well. And then goes to LSU in 2019, clearly looking for some work after Fangio left the Bears, and is a defensive analyst under Dave Aranda, before finally going to the Minnesota Vikings, where he's the assistant defensive backs coach, worked with Kyle Scott, obviously worked under Mike Zimmer, worked with Ed Donatel in 2022, and finally he's landed in Seattle. His official title is as secondary coach. So that looks like a brilliant hire, like a fairly young coach who's been in so many different systems, worked with Seattle's coaching staff too, in prior stops, and yeah, nothing to lose, and kind of cool that he's focusing on the safeties like Desai was, whereas Carl Scott was more of a kind of corner guy. I'm sure they all do everything, and obviously Seattle still has Deshaun Shedd as the assistant DB's cornerbacks coach as well. Yeah, Griff, what's your thoughts on this?
It's cool that like Carl Scott kind of gets the promotion, right? So I mean he has a lot of background with different kinds of ways of trying to blend together packages to kind of define your identity on defense. So like obviously he's still the passing game coordinator, so he'll still have a big hand in like the details of the coverage, but it'll be interesting to see if he has a different take on how to structure themselves. Obviously Clint Hurt's still going to have a big hand in that, as well as Pete Carroll, but we might see minor differences. But I like the idea of him having more influence just because he's been around so many people. So naturally it makes sense that if you're going to promote him, bring in a guy that he himself is familiar with too, and Roy Anderson. So let them divide and conquer and delegate accordingly. So beyond that, like, I don't know how you're supposed to parse if a position coach is good or bad, especially as an outsider. But, I like Scott, and if Scott likes Anderson, then I like Anderson. So,
Yeah,
that's how I see it.
yeah, that is cool. And Pete's been consistent on like letting young coaches do their thing, and Everett win forever is in there.
Right.
And other promotions, so Nico Thorpe, who was coaching with the team last year, but he didn't really have an official title. I think he'd been working on special teams, but he was always on the sideline looking hype. But he's actually got a title now. He's a defensive assistant. Will Tukoafu is still a defensive assistant, defensive line coach. But I think the defensive line aspect of that has been added on. I mean, it was obvious though, but like maybe he has a slightly grown role in his second year with the team. Greg Olson is listed as the quarterback coach, which we knew was going to happen. BT Jordan, or Brandon Jordan, as I referred to him on the podcast where we talked about it, he arrives from Michigan State, and his title is the pass rush specialist. So his role is going to be kind of unique, like it was at Michigan State, I think. And then there's two other names that I don't think have been reported. So Donovan Jackson has arrived as an offensive assistant, and so has Robbie Picasso, but I'm going to say that's Picasso, an offensive artist. He was at Rice, it appears, but Rice's website won't let me access their website from the UK, so that's fun. And at Stanford, and so there you go. And he was apparently an assistant coach with the Houston Texans. This is great podcasting. But anyway, some
Good
other
stuff.
names that
I
we'll
love
delve
it.
into. I'm nailing it. It's very hard being I'm playing all the different
You're wearing many
one-man
hats.
band, except I'm
And I'm
not. I
just
have a support act.
and I'm just sitting here.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, thanks everyone for tuning in. Like the video. If this is your first time, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel. If it's your first time also though, this is a podcast. So in your podcast app, that could be any of them, search Seattle Overload. Click download and then 5-star review and be like, wow, this was really weird hearing a British boy talk about Seattle football with a American man. There you go. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We will be back on Thursday with an outside linebackers look. Ty and I will have a news show, probably reacting to more free agency news. Maybe we'll find out who Robbie Picasso and Donovan Jackson are. Do a bit of delving into that. And we'll join you again soon. Thank you also for the donations. That's very kind of you. And we've got 47 likes and we had 100 people watching, which is amazing. So like the video. And we appreciate it. Have a good evening. And remember, the clock's